from Music for All and presented by Yamaha. It's Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, a practical web series for all music educators, embedding SEL into music education. On this episode, we welcome authors from the book The Horizon Leans Forward: Erik Kar Jun Leung, Jodie Blackshaw, Alex Shapiro, Courtney Snyder, Robert Taylor, and Alfred Watkins. Please welcome our host of Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, Scott Edgar.
Welcome to our next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music Education. Folks, we're in for a treat. You know, oftentimes we say that we have the who's who. Well, today there has been a game changer in the field of music education, and it's a book that just came out called The Horizons Lean Forward. And the most powerful part of this is that it pushes us. It pushes us to better understand the needs of the profession, the needs of our students, the needs of our communities, of our schools. In the words of Erik, as part of the work that he's done for this, at a time when the calls for diversity, equity, and inclusion are stronger and more important than ever, The Horizon Leans Forward amplifies the talent and voices of many underrepresented communities in the wind band field. Well, let's just call it what it is. It's identity, belonging, and agency. And we're here today to start to connect the dots between the work that we're hearing for underrepresented communities, social and emotional learning, and the tradition that is in our field. So, without any further ado, I would like to welcome Erik Kar Jun Leung, Alex Shapiro, Jodie Blackshaw, Courtney Snyder, Rob Taylor, and Alfred Watkins. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's great to be here, and thank you to you as well as Music for All. As Scott had mentioned, my name is Erik Leung, and I'm the Director of Bands here at Oregon State University.
And Erik, can you tell us just a little bit about your contribution to this process?
Yeah, I was the one that came up with this crazy idea, and I was the one that, luckily enough, got a chance to meet all of these amazing people that I can now call my friends. And now we've created this wonderful book. I myself wrote a chapter on the Asian experience and connecting that with getting into the music field, as well as creating the annotated bibliography, which I believe are about 200 composers with about 400 works.
Powerful. It's a resource like none other, and we are so grateful for it. Wonderful. Alex Shapiro.
Hi. Thank you so much for hosting us. And this is so wonderful for all of us to get to talk about this together once again. It has been an amazing experience collaborating on this tome, as it's turned out to be. I'm a composer. I'm based on Washington State's beautiful San Juan Island. And my chapter, in short, it addresses issues of bias that are very much alive and all too well in our field, and particularly from the perspective of women. And so part of my chapter, names the biases head on and talks about them, and gives solutions, I hope, for how to address them and change them. And then the other part of the chapter is sort of a how-to guide for what can women, whether they're established or wanting to become established in the field, do. What actions can they take for a very happy professional life?
And Alex, your chapter spoke to me about how supremely, and the entire book, about how supremely practical it is. It didn't just problematize. It then provided ideas on how the next generation can move forward with efficacy. Thank you for that. Courtney Snyder.
Hello, thank you so much for having all of us here. It's just really a joy to be able to spend time with all of you again. In terms of, well, just my own story, I'm Associate Director of Bands at the University of Michigan, and also the President of Women Band Directors International. And it was actually through that, yay, go blue. I should do it that way. And really through my work with WBDI, that I wanted to be able to highlight the voices of different women in the field, in particular women who have gone through this earlier than myself. And that's really where this came from. and giving them an opportunity over really course of 50 years to talk about their stories and getting different generational perspectives on this, to allow people to understand that even though the majority of them are white women, there's still elements of identity and still significant elements of oppression and harassment that are just embedded in our society, and giving opportunity for these women to express how they've dealt with it and how they've overcome it and how they've come together, which I really feel is one of the most important elements to solving this problem, is to build our community and to have places to be able to shed light on these issues. So that's really where my particular chapter came from.
And shedding light is what we are all about. And just, can we open up the aperture just a little bit? And I know that so many of us, we're in an apprenticeship profession. We teach how we were taught, and a lot of the tradition has just come with us over those generations. So 100% thrilled to dig in deeper. Alfred Watkins.
Hi, Scott. My name is Alfred Watkins, everyone. Excuse me. I'm former director of bands at Lassiter High School here in Marietta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. I also am the co-founder and conductor of the Cobb Wind Symphony, an all-adult community band that we founded about 22 years ago. And I'm currently the president of the Minority Band Directors National Association. It's a group of about 2,000 ethnic minority band directors from throughout the world, mostly in the United States, however. My chapter is a little unique to the other chapters in that it's a personal story of growing up in the Deep South in the 1950s as an African American, and the trials and tribulations of segregation, Jim Crow, discriminations, on through to until this summer when we actually put the book together. So it's a tale of two Americas is the name of my chapter. And for the most part, it's the Black and white America that I saw as a child, and I saw through the lenses of my own personal experiences.
And Alfred, you know what I was just supremely inspired by your chapters? I think oftentimes we think as teachers, we need to shut ourselves off. We need to not, show inside under the hood, and your vulnerability. This is my story. This is my life. This is what I'm bringing to it. And that is one of the most important things we can do to model for our students, that their stories matter, that we need to put it out there. It's not all hunky-dory. It's not all toxic positivity. And we need to put the good, bad, and ugly out there to normalize that for our students. I appreciate it more than you know. So thank you. And Jodie Blackshaw, coming to us from Australia.
Yes, hi, Scott. Such a thrill to be here, and I really do feel like somebody from the other side of the world who's contributing to this book, and sometimes looking from the outside in, which is sometimes a good place to be. So I am a composer, but I've also, for the first time in 11 years, jumped right back into teaching in a high school. It's my local high school where my daughter goes to school, and I'm loving the challenge. It's been surprising to see the changes in schools, particularly in the last 11 years. We've had the rise of the smartphone, and very much the change in student communities and the challenges and things that come with that. But also still running colourful music and doing everything I can to, promote this very important message and give it as much visibility as possible. My chapter is called the Repertoire Revolution or Evolution, and it really talks about compositional approach, and really what that comes from is both the composer's approach but also the student's approach, and how they hear music, how they digest music, how they then want to re-envision that music through their own lens, and that stems from their own cultural and gender identity, and how we can really foster that and bring that into our band experience. And I offer some suggestions of different ways that we can move forward with those kind of ideas, and talk with other band directors about what they have done to try and enable some of those kind of different learning experiences that give them the time that they need, because this is all about time. It's having the time to explore, to unpack music in a very different way that enables children to experience music differently. So yeah, that's that. that's my thing.
And Jodie, oh, I didn't know you were back in the high school. You know, that experience, that tangible reminder of what the students are needing now and how that has changed in 11 years. I'm sure, and we're going to unpack this in just a little bit, but I'm sure that's impacted your artistic creation. I'm sure that you just the creative juices and making sure that, you know, one of the big things we talk about is being culturally relevant. And I'm sure that this has given you so much food for thought in terms of what that means.
Absolutely. It's, and you know, in Australia, we teach music very differently. So the majority of our music education is what you call general music. And I'm mostly focusing on the year 11 and 12s, so those last 2 years of high school. So, and I have students who have never played in an ensemble. And you see the gaps in their musical experience as a result of that. But you know, they also have a wealth of education in other areas as well. So of course, I have a meeting tomorrow with my school principal about starting a school band because it's time to do it. And hey, you know, let's jump in.
No time like the present. Absolutely.
Yeah, that principal doesn't know what he's got coming. I'm telling you, he's got no idea.
He'll be better off for it on the flip side. And Rob Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Rounding out the international element of the panel, I'm Rob Taylor. I'm Director of Bands here at University of British Columbia in Vancouver, BC. A citizen of North America, dual US and Canadian. And it's just been a joy to work on this project and to continually get to come back with these group of people and discuss these really important issues. So Scott, thanks for inviting us. My chapter was on queer identity and visibility in wind bands. And as the so-called hidden minority, visibility is a really key word, I think, and you've heard it said many times already in our short session together. But when Erik first asked me about this chapter, I have to admit, I found it to be quite a daunting task. The idea of maybe representing such a broad queer alphabet soup, as I've referred to it, with gender identity and sexual identity. So my approach to writing was very much about kind of stepping back and trying to amplify the voices of this really unique and diverse community. And so my chapter is stories told by 20 people who in some way identify as queer, and we chose to use that as an identifying or unifying term, but a really broad spectrum of backgrounds and identities. And just reading and hearing and curating these stories, the interviews were heartbreaking, they were inspirational, and the goal is just to share those stories with the hope that they inspire and help other people kind of with their journey as well.
Rob, just hearing you talk about having an opportunity to amplify other stories, you know, I think that's so much why many of us got into education. It's that we want to amplify the voices of the students who are in front of us. And it sounds like you have the perfect outlet to be able to take stories, to curate them, to find commonalities, but more importantly, find uniqueness and put that together in that space. Because that's what this book is all about, is to find the uniqueness. And, you know, we just crowned a new Grammy Educator of the Year whose mantra is level the playing field. How can we level the field? And I think that is exactly what is at the heart of what we're talking about with this just seminal text now. So, Erik, I want to start with you a little bit, because a key part of social and emotional learning, it always starts with reflection. We need to do the reflecting as teachers, as artists, as educators, as students of life. And that means that we need to guide our students in reflecting. But I'm going to ask this group to reflect a little bit, because the act, Rob, as you just said, the act of actually putting this together, it might have been daunting. It might have been inspiring. But I'm going to ask you, how did the process of writing your chapter fundamentally get you to become more aware of either what wind band is or what the world around you is? So, Erik, why don't we start with you as leader of this crew?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I don't think I'm the leader. I'm the youngest out of all of this group of people, and so I definitely feel like I'm learning every day. But for me, it was this, as you mentioned, Scott, it was this opportunity to tell stories, and more importantly, it was a chance to retell stories from groups of people that had been left out or at least been marginalized, in our canonical history. And so that was really important, for me. But in terms of reflecting, I was actually thinking a lot about my mom as I was writing this book. And she would always say that, I need to surround myself with people that are smarter than me. And as I get older and older and more experienced, I would like to add to that I also need to surround myself with people that are actually different than me, that share different viewpoints. And for me, that's been the wonderful thing about reading everyone's stories in the book, as well as talking to students, talking to people across North America about the book, and listening to their stories. And you had mentioned this word amplifying, that I think is so important. And for me, the one thing as I reflect on this book is amplification requires us to make space. And more importantly, for us to actually listen, and to hear what other people are saying. And so I think for me as an educator, it's that idea of surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me, people that are different than myself, and really taking them a time to amplify by taking a step back and letting people come up and then share. And so that was, for me, the most important thing.
Erik, spot on. We need to take a step back if our students are going to take a step forward. And, I've just been trying to embrace being uncomfortable lately, that there's so many things that people are pushing me to grow. And, I think that's the space that we all hopefully are trying to assume. When you say make space, it's how can we position ourselves to be pushed and to not see ourselves as wrong when we might have limited viewpoints, but to see it as a space for growth, and that it's a good thing. The phrase that I've been using more and more is safely uncomfortable, that we have a space where we can feel safe to be uncomfortable and to grow. And just powerful, powerful words there, Erik. Would anyone else like to reflect upon what the writing process has done for your reflections? Wonderful, Alex.
I want to just pick up, I will say that, but I want to pick up on something that we're talking about regarding amplification that keeps going through my mind as I hear Erik speak so eloquently about it, is the concept of self-worth and respect. That I think in order to give students, or anybody really, but let's talk about students for the time being, to give them a sense of agency, to give them permission, to give them a path to being amplified, to feeling worthy of expressing themselves. That comes from us, first and foremost. Those of us who are considered their mentors or their teachers or their parents, ideally, to give them the space where they feel comfortable expressing themselves and where they understand that they are respected and that their views and individuality are respected. That's, to me, what a lot of amplification is when it comes to students, is letting them run with the ball and giving them trust.
Trust. That's a tricky one, because I think that this last year we've been taught not to trust. We've been taught, oh, you're within 6 feet of me, I don't trust you. And, so much of what we're talking about right now is that I think when we get back to what we are longing for, we're going to have to relearn how to trust. We're going to have to relearn how to assume that space.
Yeah. Well, I think younger people are going to have to relearn really how to be with each other in a physical space. For those who have been hybrid or remote for a year, I mean, the same for us, frankly. I mean, it's been a very, very isolating year, and humans are really physical mammals, right? We are used to being together, and we're used to relating. Our pheromones relate to each other. When we're in a room, we read each other from body language and all of these things that you cannot get via Zoom. And it's no different for the students. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of re-entry process that's going to be necessary. Yeah.
We are in store for a mental health crisis like we've never seen, and it is going to take a long time to recover from this, long after the physical crisis has subsided. The mental health crisis, we need targeted response on this now more than ever. Jodie.
Yeah, well, here in Australia, we are nearly back to normal. Our cases are extremely low. I mean, if anything, you could call us a bit trigger happy. If we get one case, the whole state shuts down. Like everyone just shuts down and goes, "Whoa, we've got a case," you know. And we're seriously talking one case. That's not such a bad thing because they'll only shut us down for 3 or 5 days, and they make sure it doesn't go anywhere. So, but we have all of our ensembles in particular, which weren't allowed to rehearse at all for all of last year, are all just coming back in and rebuilding, and people are rebuilding programs. And it's that whole thing of reinstating the trust that it's okay to play your instrument, that parents need to feel safe, that it's okay for their children to be in a room and play their instrument, and that it's that we can start putting feelers out and we can start to connect. Or we'd like to do a workshop together. Gee, can we do that? Is that okay? We would never have asked those questions before, but it's those connections and those experiences and working together is something that our students in particular desperately, desperately need. And we're just starting to feel our way in Australia. And yes, those cracks in the mental health issue with our children are most definitely there. I start most of my classes with a 5-minute mindfulness session, just purely to try and get them back into the zone and just reconnect not only with their own self, but with each other. And that's something we're doing school-wide. So, yeah, it's a long road ahead for all of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Jodie, you hinted there at the end on mindfulness. And, people say mindfulness, SEL, how are they related? And the answer is, when we're starting to look at de-escalation techniques, when we're centering techniques, self-awareness, mindfulness is all part of what we're talking about. So thank you for prioritizing that. And oftentimes we do just need a space to lower the temperature and just kind of organize the gobbledygook as we're coming in to hopefully be able to focus on what we want to get out of our educational environment. Alfred.
Yes, I'd like to offer a couple of opinions on the subject. When Eric asked me to write the chapter or write a part of my story, it was a part of me that I hadn't revisited in quite some time. And it was a part of the racist America that I had overlooked and allowed for it to be a part of the wretched past of our country, not just my story. So when I taught at Lassiter, when I taught my first job, I taught in an all-Black school in the inner city. I was an African-American band director to those African-American students. When I transferred to the white community at Lassiter High School, the student was 99.5% white. I was gray for almost every year of my profession at Lassiter. When you're a school band director in this country, you're a choir director, when you're going to an evaluation type of situation, you're always conscious of the people that are adjudicating, which are from the dominant group, are mostly white males. They will punish you with a lowered rating for your students if they think that you're not user-friendly with how they think. When you're in the university setting, you're an African American, you have to muzzle yourself. You can't speak truth to power, so to speak, because of the next job that you may be seeking, or the next opportunity you may wish to get as a guest conductor or as a composer trying to get your music published. And so it was not until my retired years, really, when I decided to go back and tell my story. And it will sound unique to some people, but it's truly the story of Black America from 1954 until present. It has forced me, however, maybe I should say encouraged me to study the history of America along with the history of the world. And I'm a much wiser and a much broader person now because my study at this time is personal and for my good and my own good and edification, as opposed to a test question or trying to pass something or read something because I was asked to as a part of my academic background. And it has really helped me to see more parts of America. I'm still troubled with using the word queer when I see Rob use it, because it was such a derogatory term to me as a child. I took it out of my vocabulary. And but it has forced me to learn the history of myself and the history of others. Now I realize that Australia is 14 hours in our future and a day ahead. And it's not something that I paid much attention to until I came in contact with an Australian and befriended one. And so those experiences have helped me more than I can ever explain.
Alfred, all of that, when you said that, now that it's part of your experience, it's a part of the connection that you're seeing. It's not a test. It's not an answer, a true or false test, or name the year. I think that's what we're all trying to do through our classrooms. How can we make the work that we're doing in our classrooms more supremely connected and relevant for our students, as opposed to the test of correct notes and correct rhythms? Can we position it to a space where it is relevant? So, Alfred, I'd like to kind of follow up on this, because so much of what I heard you say there was about your own personal identity, what you brought to the table and how that aligned with your experiences. So knowing the hundreds and thousands of students who you've interacted with over your career, how has the work that you've done in the classroom influenced you? And when you were in the classroom, how did you try to help your students better understand their identity?
We did it through several means. Oftentimes I would do it through the repertoire or through the programming. And if I could create a diverse repertoire and diverse program, I find that most pieces of music had a story, whether it was motivic development or some programmatic nature. And every composer had a story. And so it would allow me to go and become a social studies teacher, because I would tell the story of the composer. So if I played a piece by a Caucasian man, I'd tell his story. It's Mr. Sousa, for an example. I'd tell his story all the way through a period of time. But if I'm playing a piece by a person that is underrepresented, it was a wonderful opportunity for the students to see inside of my spirit, my soul, and my heart. And it became very easy. And I think for the next generation of teachers, beginning next fall, if they just tell the story of the music and the story of the composer, if the composing process, if the selection is diverse. If it's just playing white men's music all over again, we're going to be stuck in the same quagmire that we're in now, and we won't see forward.
And Alfred, 100%, in our world, we call it dead white guys. And if it's not dead white guys, it's living white guys. And we certainly need to get beyond that. But, this leads me to this idea of representation being step one and not step final. That representation is only going to matter if it leads to equity, if it elevates the playing field. That is... I realize that within the text of what you had, you're referring to it as diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are really reconsidering the order of those words, that equity needs to be first and foremost, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's part of the dialogue that we're having right now. Alfred, can you think of, and this is going to be a hard question for you, my friend, what is one example from your teaching career where you said, this was the composer, this was the moment where we saw light bulbs with our students and they said, I get it?
There were two in particular, and we played Music for Prague in 1968, Karel Husa, and I told the story of the Czechoslovakian people and their disadvantaged position in the world. And in the following year, I played a piece called A Movement for Rosa by Mark Camphouse. It was the early, middle, and late life of Rosa Parks. And then I could tell the African-American story because it was valid to the piece of music that I was working through. And those were seminal moments. There were lots of them, but those two were signatures in my mid-career.
Beautiful. Thank you. Courtney.
Yeah, I was thinking about, it's funny because I've reflected upon this process just for many, many cycles, since when it really started and I was trying to put everything together till where I am today. But what really hit me and ultimately came forward in the book is that concept of the single story. And in America, there has been this concept of what a single American story is. But the truth is that there's not a single American story. That's actually what America is. And only now are we starting to recognize how many different stories there are, and that there is validity to every single story. And it's our job to not only be able to speak our own story, but to also know other stories and know that other stories are not our own. And I think in particular, through reading all these stories and all these chapters, it's my job to be educated on what somebody who is not like me can be thinking. Or it's not their job to understand my culture. It's my job to understand theirs. And I think especially as a white person in the dominant culture here, what the minorities have done is educated themselves on my culture because they've had to. But it's now my job to share that burden in some ways, to make sure that it's not just this one-sided viewpoint, but that it's reciprocal. And I think about how that could be incredibly beautiful, both in the larger like macrocosm that is our country, but also in the microcosm of what our small spaces in our classrooms are.
Courtney, just incredibly powerful. Thank you for that. I'm reminded of something that I saw when I was doom scrolling through Facebook the other night that said that that equity for those with privilege feels like oppression. And that is just reminded to me daily that when we see that those stories that are out there, the beautiful stories that are out there, are so uncomfortable for some. So uncomfortable just to say that other people are from different backgrounds. That's an uncomfortable, vulnerable position. So part of this, we're going to open up the space here if anyone else has any other comments on identity, but we're starting to certainly transition into this idea of belonging. And when we talk about it from an SEL standpoint, this is why we always start with self-reflection. And we have to better understand who we are, what we are bringing to the table, till we can better understand how the stories start to interweave. Would anyone else like to add about identity at this point?
Well, I'll jump in for a little bit, and it's not something that that I came up with myself, but it's something that I think in conversation with Courtney and with Rob, we talked about identity specifically, about moving from the me to the we, and really thinking more about collaboration, joining with other people, and so I thought that itself was a really powerful thing, and for me was a good reminder, about identity for myself. Really thinking less about myself and more about the community.
And that's so tough. And that's so tough, especially trumpet player here. That it's hard sometimes, and I think normalizing that, moving from a me-centric to a we-centric is really, really tough. There's a fabulous elementary general music teacher in California. Her name is Darlene Machacone, and she wrote a chapter on social and emotional learning for equity and anti-racism. And she did a content analysis looking at how individualistic or how collectivist countries are. And I bet you can guess where the United States lands. Smack dab at the top as being individualistic. So, we're fighting through that rugged individualism that is part of this. And, to understand that to move from me to we is an essential step to start the healing that needs to happen. And there's so much that is just baked in that we have to overcome. Jodie.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I guess I recently finished my PhD, and when you do a PhD in composition, thank you, when you do a PhD in composition, it's an enormous reflection exercise. The whole exercise is Some people call it navel gazing, depends on who you are. But you really go and investigate yourself, and you find out where your voice comes from. You find out why you write the music that you write, and you find out why you have this voice that you do. And what that's really turned into for me personally is that every child has these what they call first experiences, and your first experiences, and they come from your social upbringing, from your cultural upbringing, from your genetic makeup, from everything. And that when you have this opportunity to unearth this in your students, and you can give them the resources to be able to share the way that their lens of the world, and that they can transform that into some kind of musical experience with their peers. It's so incredibly powerful. I had no idea when I started getting into this that I actually write with tone colours first. That tone colours is how I hear the world, and that I start that. And my music is very different to a lot of other band music that's out there. I remember being at 2006 Midwest, and Cheryl Floyd's band from Texas played my Whirlwind. And I'd been, I'd drenched myself in American wind band culture. I'd never been to a Midwest. I didn't know anything about the American. I was so green. My daughter was 8 months old. I was out drinking with the Boston Brass Quintet every night. I really just didn't know what it was all about. And then I heard my piece Whirlwind, and I was sitting next to Frank DeKelly, and they started with the Whirlies. And the whole audience, this was still at the Hilton in the old ballroom, and the whole audience just went, oh, when this sound started. It was a colour. It was a colour that wasn't traditionally owned by the wind band. And I thought, wow, it really does sound different. And it wasn't till many, many years later of, talking with Kevin Day. He's a rhythm first composer. He writes rhythms first. I thought, I would never do that in a million years. And then you talk to other composers and they get a harmony down. Other people think in textures. And when you start realizing and reflecting upon the fact that everybody has their different entry point, and they get in there, and not only do they deconstruct music differently, but they construct it differently. And, if we can really identify and embrace all of those differences, then we just embrace all composers from everywhere, as well as really reach every single one of our students.
Jodie, home run. You just absolutely made it musical. And, that's one of the biggest things that we're talking about in the SEL world, is that it needs to be embedded into the musical process and product. It can't be something that we're doing music, stop, SEL, life skills, woohoo, back to the music. That's not going to be authentic for anybody. And to honor the life story that you just mentioned, 100%, Jodie. Thank you so much for that. All right, so with that, once we have that identity piece, then we're ready to start to explore how we're coming together. And Rob, I'm going to throw it to you to better understand from your perspective how we can better create spaces for belonging, because we know that there's no meaningful music that happens if we don't feel safe taking risks, to be vulnerable. So how can we better do that?
I'm happy to jump into this. I want to come out first as a harmony first conductor, since Jodie has shared her story. When we talk about risk taking and creating a space for risk taking, we're talking about embracing failure, and learning that failure is part of every process, and it's not to be avoided. It's actually a goal. It's how we get better. Discomfort is such an important step in kind of breaking outside of our safe zone and growing. So, all of us here are involved in education in many ways in our life. And so, we've been dedicated to embracing a growth mindset, the idea that failure is going to be part of the process, and maybe the most important part of the process, how we respond to failures, So I think, when it comes to belonging, creating a space where risk-taking is really valued and honored it's just so important. And I think that comes with, stepping out front as a leader and being vulnerable, so that whoever we're working with, that they can see that we're willing to step out and admit that we too fail, and that it's part of the process, and that we're all learning and growing. And I think that's huge. To scaffold that, though, I think it's especially important for us to be teaching skills that are really related to noticing without judgment, just being curious, being curious about others, being curious about ourselves. And when those failures happen, especially, just being curious, noticing, and not sort of beating yourself up or judging somebody else, but just noticing and kind of embracing a curiosity. So for me, that's kind of the first step in belonging. But with the subject of the chapter that I wrote, belonging is just a huge element. And we're talking about in music, a culture of collaboration. These are mostly group processes, right? So when it comes to SEL, there's very much the idea of working together to achieve like personal and group goals, right? And so those collective goals, you just mentioned the rugged individualism of the American, and then the maybe slightly too polite Canadian, and then the Aussie that lives perfectly in those two worlds, between those two worlds. But this idea of achieving group goals, we're in high candor environments in ensembles. We have to be able to have some discomfort, some uncomfortable truth telling. We have to create safety. Everybody needs to feel trusted. They need to feel valued. And there needs to be a purpose in what we're doing, a collective purpose. And I think finding collective purpose it's difficult these days. And the music rehearsal room is a place where we live and breathe that gap between where we are and where we want to be. That's where we live. And to be able to live and hold that space between where we are and where we want to be, I think that's something we really can model in the music environment that can just spill over into all aspects of life. I'll say one more thing on the concept of belonging, and that is for many kids, music is life, and I mean that literally. We are just this week having conversations at another school board, as happens across North America, with the elimination of music programs in the Victoria School District here locally. And I listened to so many compelling stories, but the one that really hit me was the mother of a student who in grade 8 would not have survived without the sense of belonging in their music class. And for many kids, for kids that feel like they don't belong anywhere, if we can create a space where they really feel that they belong, it can be a matter of life or death, literally. So I think this is just such a critical aspect of what we're doing.
Rob, thank you. So powerful. I'm reminded that our classrooms, we all like to think that our classrooms are safe spaces. But my question is, safe for some or safe for all? And are we really digging deep to see how safe is our classroom for all of our students? Safe for the go-getters, safe for the hardcore bandies? Yeah, of course. But when we start to really analyze who's in our space, and then we start to be a little bit vulnerable, then I think we can start to truly see where those holes are. You talk about curiosity, 100%. For us, we call it tinkering, and I like to say, I was a beginning band director for a long time. And one of my favorite days, they open up the case and they're shiny in the eyes until I opened my mouth and said, don't do that. Don't do it this way. Don't touch it. And, what if I just allow that creativity and tinkering to expand a little bit longer, maybe just like 2 minutes. And then we're able to really start to embrace that students can figure things out on their own if we just give them the space to do it. And they might do it in a way that's better than what we're going to tell them how to do.
They bring so much knowledge to the table, and we just have to find a way to honor all of those different ways of knowing and being, and so I think that's a huge part of it too. Yeah.
Beautiful. Courtney.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that relationship to belonging, especially coming at it from a director perspective. Um, you know, my job is not just to hear them so that they're playing right and pushing the right buttons and making the right sound on their instrument and being focused and whatnot, but me hearing every single one of them play is also a way, and identifying that like every single time I'm in contact with them is a way to let them know that I know they're there and I'm valuing them. And I think that that's also something that the students should be doing with one another. That we know that listening makes a better ensemble, and you can't really play well without listening well. But what about listening to give voice to that person beside you? That your job is to listen to them, to hear what it is that they bring to the table. I think it changes perhaps how we value our music in recognizing that it's not just about the objective, getting it to sound good, but to really recognize, I mean, music is kind of beautiful because everybody's coming through, like they have different roles within that part, right? And they don't even always stay in the same role. If the music is good, ideally, it shouldn't just stay in the completely same role. And that's kind of a beautiful way that community can work, where we have a supportive role at this moment, but now we're going to actually lead in this moment. Like this could be a kind of training ground for how we're actually supposed to be in real life. But I think we assume that we know this, but I think we need to be more intentional with how we direct it from the podium, how we experience it within the classroom, because I don't think we can assume, I guess is just the better way to say that, is that there's we need to be more intentional about the belonging, both in terms of how we build that community apart from how they make music, but also with how we make music, that is part of our building community.
When we learn to be better listeners musically, that skill has to help us be better listeners interpersonally, right? We think that we're great listeners, but that disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Erik.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of jump off of what both Courtney and Rob were talking about. And I think that there's, in some ways, an elephant in the room. And I think the elephant in the room is the fact that for all of us here, we want things to sound great. We want things, to be perfect, to be played well. And we were taught, that's what we need to expect. And for all of us to realize within ourselves that it is a journey, takes a lot of patience and a lot of, as you said, Scott, like self-reflection, and I know for myself, when I'm standing in front of my ensemble, yes, I get frustrated, when things don't sound right. And it's hard for me, to take a step back and to realize that, there are other stories. There are stories of my students, that may be affecting the way that the music sounds at this point. And to kind of go a little further into that, I think for all of us, including myself, to acknowledge, as Rob said, that we are going to fail, and to openly show people that, there's that friction. We're working through things just as much as our own students, and that it is a daily struggle, for some people. And I think for me, to think about belonging is as Rob mentioned, about modeling this idea of being willing to fail, and to struggle openly with it and to embrace the friction.
And that vulnerability is tough. As Alfred and I were talking about just a second ago, we don't always like to show people that we're struggling, but especially to be able to model that this is important, this is essential, and this is a skill. We can practice that skill of being vulnerable, and we can do it in a safe space in a musical way. I think this is a perfect segue to Jodie. Jodie, you sent a note to me earlier today, and it just had some words that I want to read and then get your thought, because, I do feel that we are on the precipice of something special in music education and education. I think the pandemic has highlighted some things for us that has said, we're in a paradigm shift. There are some things that we've experienced this last year that the genie's out of the bottle, that the performance might not be the end all be all, that it's going to be important, but there are other elements about music education that are equally as important. So bear with me as I read just your brilliant works. Taking the heat off the podium and placing it back into the hands of the students themselves. If we are to bring SEL into the classroom, matched with equity and diversity, then the fundamental shift in the goal of music education must change. We must allow them to teach, explore, fail, create, and collaborate. So Jodie, can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Oh, it's on one of my soapbox moments. I just had my morning coffee and was wah! I know that everybody here knows what I'm talking about and has experienced what I'm talking about, and it is when I've had a few experiences in recent years, namely with a piece that I wrote called 13 Moons, which is 4 composing pieces called North, South, East and West. And this stems from research about how we can really create a optimal emotional climate in our band class, and how we can really bring those different rhythm first and harmony first and melody first composers in our spaces and get them to collaborate and work together. And it's really interesting when you put them in the hands of other directors and they have that experience about how students, that we were talking about it before, that and Rob talked about it before, about this vulnerability, and that you get to a low point, that you reach a point in that learning, and there's discomfort. That you have these experiences, but what you gain from that discomfort and what you grow and how much you develop from those kind of uncomfortable experiences is tenfold what you're going to get out of learning safe repertoire and doing a safe concert. And for me, and certainly in my experiences as a band director, as an educator, as a mother, as this whole thing that you've got to hold back. And yes, you want to share your experience and your knowledge, but sometimes, and you were talking about it before with the beginner band, maybe if I gave them 2 minutes, what if we just hold back and see what comes forward? And sometimes when we step back, we allow room, and then the students step forward, and they will surprise and delight you every single time. And they will come up with ideas that you go, I would never, ever, ever have thought to do that. Wow, let's try that. And everyone else in the room will go, wow, where are they coming from? I would never have thought that. And you get this amazing collaboration, and you get constructivist education working at its very best. And everyone builds and stands on top of each other and creates this monument to themselves, and everyone's a piece of it.
Jodie, so inspiring. 100% constructivist environment. I love that. And that's not how everyone conceives our work. And I think when we are able to better understand that, we're going to understand that it is all about going back to this idea about amplifying students' voice and giving them choice, and realizing that every student's not going to jump over the same bar, jump through the same hoop. So Alex, I want to pick your brain on this as a composer who I know does this very intentionally. And Jodie, I know 13 Moons absolutely gets at this piece too. And Alex, the work that you're doing to provide space to amplify students' voice and how that is part of your compositional process. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. I've got several examples, and all of Jodie's beautiful words really set this up, because she and I are so of like minds with this as writers, that the pandemic, for all the terrible things that it brought, it brought some very good things in terms of how we engage with students and how we get them to engage with themselves and with each other. And an example that happened in my life, and Courtney knows this directly because we worked on this a little bit, is back last March when everything started to shut down and all the ensembles couldn't meet all of a sudden, yet they still had semester and, of course, as we now know, several semesters to get through. Who knew? I was asked to come up with an idea for what to do with all of these instrumentalists. They were not composers, they were instrumentalists. And I decided, well, we have Zoom. We don't have synchronous audio. We can't get them playing together and connecting to each other that way, the way they are used to on that level of a social, emotional learning experience, but we can keep them connected. And so I devised a syllabus where they pick up their instrument and they write a short, 15-second motif, and they record it. They upload it. They're put in little sound teams of about 5 or 6 students out of each big ensemble. They're all broken down. And those students get to collaborate with each other using each other's short motifs to create a piece of music. This has been done now throughout the country with a lot of schools. The results are unbelievable. These so-called non-composers, which people like Jodie and I, and probably everybody here, loves to say to students, if you play instruments, you're already composers. You just haven't been composing, but there's no reason that you're not a composer. Let's give it a shot. And oh my gosh, what has been coming out of countless numbers of students has been phenomenal. So this is one way of figuring out how to connect people with each other, even under very different circumstances that a little over a year ago we never in a million years would have anticipated. Another way that I love to connect them is with material that might have an impact of a message. Whether it's social or environmental, something. And Rob and I have talked at great length about this because he puts a lot of effort into doing this in his programming when he puts together contextual events, really, and happenings. And I feel very strongly that art is such a powerful vehicle for raising awareness and with intention, shifting people's thinking. It doesn't mean changing it necessarily, but it means that when they came into a concert space, either to play or to listen, they weren't thinking about something. And then due to what you have put in front of them as a composer or a conductor, they leave the concert space very much thinking about that thing, whatever that thing is. So by raising awareness, both with the students and the musicians themselves and with their audiences, you're opening up a conversation about whatever it is you choose, to have them talking about. I think that's very, very powerful. I've done it a number of times in my pieces, and especially in pieces that are well suited to large ensembles and multimedia. Because just as we all know, people respond to visuals and lighting and all this. We're in a screen-based culture. And so watching them light up when they see, lighting and videos and all kinds of things, sometimes physical movement that they're not expecting in the context of a concert, that is a very emotional way of reaching them, separate from the music itself.
Alex, you said light up, lights out, 100%. I mean, it's absolutely a space. I think oftentimes we forget that our concerts are a dialogue, that it's not a one-way arrow from the stage to the audience, and the audience has thoughts on this. And when we engage that dialogue, I think it just takes it to the next level. And we all know that we are fighting for audiences. Once we get back to get back to some level of reality, we are fighting for the future of the arts and finding relevance and connectivity. And I think I speak for all of us that we thank you and all composers who are striving to engage audiences and musicians alike in new and different and engaging ways that's going to push our field further. Courtney, you had something to add on this one?
As I was listening to what Alex was talking about, as well as Jodie, and honestly, in having studied their works and performed their works and actually worked on this project with 2 different ensembles of mine that Alex initiated with Tim out at University of Washington, that in conjunction with talking to some of my students about what their own kind of fears were and what kinds of things they wanted to learn and things that they don't often get that experience from in the ensemble itself, was just recognizing this this need and desire on their parts to improvise and to be able to be comfortable putting it forward. Like there's still so much, and this goes back to what Rob was mentioning, there's still so much judgment embedded in classical music making that if it's not perfect, it's not good. And so there's this just fear and like, I can't make my instrument sound because I don't want people to notice all the things that are wrong with how I'm playing. There's a whole thing we could do separate on trying to unpack that. But I'm really interested in making sure that I'm giving them opportunities to expand their own musicianship, to be able to try to break down that barrier of getting rid of the judgment within our ensemble, even amongst peer-to-peer, because that's still very strong in the conservatory mindset of this, you're competing for jobs, right? So that breaks down community. But there is a need for them to have the space to be able to say what I have to contribute here, even if it's just a whole note with feeling, that's plenty. But I think that there's a whole realm of music making in our spaces that hasn't been touched on yet. And that's actually one of my future projects coming up here, is to how to incorporate that more intentionally within the large ensemble space. And that's composing on the spot, but it's not necessarily the same as composing a piece, right, and putting it down and whatnot. But just having that ability to say, this is how I feel about this piece, and I can express that through my instrument. I think there's some beautiful things there that we can start developing in our students, or allowing them to develop in themselves. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Provide that space, provide that open door where that can happen. When we talk about amplifying student voice and giving them choice, improvisation, and we respect our colleagues in the jazz world, but there are so many different ways that we can improvise outside of a chord progression in a way that can be meaningful and exploratory and express our innermost hopes, feelings, and dreams. So with that, friends, we're coming to the end of our time today, but I want to allow us some space now, open up some space now for us just to dream about what the future of music education can look like when we reach a space of diversity and equity, and understanding that we have a long, long way to go to achieve this. But what are your hopes? What are your aspirations? What are your dreams for what this can look like? And Alfred, if we can start with you, that would be great.
My hope and wish for the future is that my grandson, young Miles Watkins, who's 2.5 years old, has an opportunity to be in an America where this conversation is not necessary to be had. Where our music schools recognize the fact that our graduates earn terminal degrees without studying the music of 7 of the 8 billion people on the planet. That we've got to go back and revisit that. That the cell phone, or the smartphone in particular, that Jodie mentioned earlier, which has been around about 10 or 12 years, has changed the game. Is that our students don't need us anymore. They can have their conversations, they can create their music, they can listen to their sounds without us. And they still need the spirit of live music. But if it's void, they'll miss us. My band students have always been terribly enthusiastic when they would play music for Prague 1968, 28 years ago, and we had jazz band in the afternoon. And they would flock to what they heard as contemporary music to their ears, which was American music. And I don't think we'll survive as a community unless we embrace all the music of all the peoples of the world. And that is my hope and my wish. But we've got to change the mindset of the teachers in order for this to occur. And so with the whole educational system that we're trained in has to change. And I likely won't live to see it, but my young grandson, Miles, hopefully will.
A powerful call to action, Alfred. Thank you. Rob.
Alfred, that was really inspiring. And my hope is also that Miles has everything that you ever could imagine or dream for in all of this. And uh, I I think when we're looking to the future, one of the words that's kind of come up very frequently in tonight's conversation is the idea of intentionality. And I just think bringing more visibility to what's going on inside, to what's going on behind the scenes, to the thinking that's framing the work that we do, to curating more traditional repertoire through the lens of important issues in today's society, in addition to bringing in all kinds of new voices. I just think it just takes an incredible amount of intentionality, and I think that is our future. That is the road forward. If we can deal with equity and access in the important ways that it really needs to happen now, then we can really bring this intentionality and visibility to intention in everything we're doing.
Intentionality and visibility, right there, 100%. Jodie.
Alfred, I'd like to share a story with you. In 2014, I had my piece for Banquest, Letter from Sado, premiered in Minnesota. A little bit sensitive at the moment, but that's where it was premiered. And Rosemount Middle School had three grade 8 bands, and they all did their own version of Letter from Sado, because there's moments in Sado where you can create your own pieces. And in one of the bands, there was this fantastic, beautiful spirit by the name of Bria, an African-American young girl. And she was on tenor sax, and she was all about it. She knew exactly where she wanted that piece to go and what it was going to be. And I said, well, how about you come up here on the podium and show us what you think? And she got up and she conducted the creative moments. And she did this. That night when we had the concert, she turned up in full blacks with a row of pearls, everything, and she completely became the conductor. That girl Bria has been the face of colourful music. We had this magnificent photo of her, and I got permission from her mum all those years ago to use it for various things, and she's the face of colourful music. And recently, thanks to Facebook, I was able to reconnect with her 7 years later, and I wanted to read with you what she says to me. And she says, "Wow, Jodie, of course I remember you. I tell people about my experience all the time. I'm honoured that I left such an impact on you. Composing that piece is something that I will never forget. Thank you for using my picture as representation for an important aspects of school bands. Music has always been very important to me, and composing your piece has continuously inspired me to create my own music. I am very grateful that you chose me and that you have me on your website. It means a lot to me." So here is a girl 7 years later who had that experience of being able to invest herself. And as far as she's concerned, she composed that piece of music. I didn't. She composed that piece of music, and it still has such a dramatic impact. And my vision for the future is that every student has an experience like that, and that it continues to inspire them and impact them throughout their entire life. And that's what I hope we have for all of your grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, Alfred, and for everybody else.
Jodie, I'm sorry. Whenever I hear stories of student empowerment like that, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. And yeah. The story of Bria is the story that we want for all. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. Alex.
Wow, Jodie, that is just great. And I think we're all pivoting back to Alfred's powerful words, because that, Alfred, you just have said everything, so much so that even this one is in on the action, saying yes. I want to draw an interesting parallel. I've never said this before, so it'll either sink or swim. We'll find out. But to me, one of the great evil in our world is segregation and differentness. The fact that we see color, the fact that we see anything different from whoever we are from everybody else. That is a terrible, evil thing, and horrible things have happened for centuries because of this. The compartmentalization and the categorization of people, it has brought nothing but pain. And to be a little less dramatic about it, I do think that the compartmentalization and the categorization of music and genres and music from, and Alfred started this going because this is what I wanted to say as well, from music from around the world, that is very, very different than the limited 12 notes that we inherit from Western European tradition. If we don't expose all students from the time that they can say mama, if we don't expose them to all kinds of music, we're really missing the mark. And for me as a composer, who is, I think gesturally, I think microtonally, I think in all sorts of ways, and that gives me great joy and great freedom and fluidity. I want students to have this experience given to them. And as long as, at least in the United States, I can't speak for other countries, but at least in the United States, as long as teachers are only teaching from textbooks that include all the same old, we're not going to make any progress. They are turning their backs on the vast majority of music around the world that is quite different from the music that we consider ours and consider so wrongly to be the only worthy music to teach. It angers me, as you can tell, and it frustrates me. So I would like to see a future that is open to people of all natures and music of all natures. They are one and the same in many ways.
We have to decolonize. We have to better understand exactly what you said. Alex, I've been searching for words that you just said so beautifully. And I think that all of this, understand that we have still Courtney and Erik. This is required listening for everybody. This is exactly where we need to be pushed to go. And Alex, before I let you go, what's the cat's name?
This is Sucia, Sucia. She's a kitten, and she's named after one of the islands in front of me.
So beautiful. Thank you. Something we need to embrace. Cats, dogs, toddlers. Yes, it's part of the game these days.
And the cat's multicolored, see?
Stunning. Courtney.
It's just going along with exactly what Alex was mentioning is, I guess I have three different kind of perspectives here or layers maybe to think about what my utopian situation would be of sorts. One is building the fluid musicians, where students have the ability to be able to go in and out of different kinds of music, and they can perform all kinds of music, and they get experiences. You really can't build fluid musicians without them experiencing multiple different kinds of music. And valuing it. I'm kind of tired of the valuing of only certain kinds of music, or even certain elements of music being like hierarchically more important than others. Music is music. The next thing, honestly, this comes from looking at this Zoom screen and seeing all of you here, is how we're moving forward is through collaboration of multiple different ways of thinking and bringing people with different perspectives together. And it builds a unique purpose. Like, by being able to bring all of just us together, we're thinking of things, and each one of us is becoming changed as a result of it, but we're all also kind of achieving what is our unique gifts or what we have to bring, and it kind of creates a unique purpose that we're able to serve. And to me, this kind of team approach versus the director only approach, like my way kind of perspective, is something that is maybe the way forward. And it also, it allows like the strengths to come out in different ways. And I just feel like this collaboration concept is how we should be running all of our music. And it's how we should be running all of our programs. It's how we should be structuring the future of education. It's all of it. The way forward is not going to be from a one top-down approach. It is absolutely from bringing a bunch of people together and saying, this is what we have to bring. Let's grow it, and let's bring it to our students.
Beautifully stated. And the beautiful panel is absolutely a microcosm of what we need to scale. We need to bring this model in all aspects. So perfectly stated. Erik, close us out, please.
um, gosh, what hasn't been said that has just been so amazing from everyone else? Um, I think just highlighting, what a lot of people have been already saying is that um, we can shift the system. Alfred had talked about the system, and there's a wonderful book out there that talks about covert racism, and covert racism is the system. And I think, as Courtney was saying, when we value the uniqueness of everyone's story, but then we also are brave enough to come together. And as Rob had said, to come together in community, come together in humility, embrace the fact that we are different, but that we're all technically together and trying to shift the system. I think that's where we're going to see the change. When we recognize our humility, we recognize our privilege, but we come together to shift the system. And from there, I really do believe that we can create a new Canada, a new Australia, and a new America.
Erik and everybody, I think the one thing that I'm hearing from everybody is that we have a choice, that the arts and music aren't inherently good. We have to make a choice to make them good. The arts and music aren't inherently a space that we're going to build identity, belonging, agency. We have a choice to do so. And the choice is in front of us, and we have the opportunity to either proceed with courage or to go back to the way that things have always been. And let's just face it, the way that things always have been isn't the best way. And now, as we're moving forward into a space that no one has experienced before, now is the time to move forward with efficacy, with strength, with courage, and with listening harder than we speak. So from the bottom of my heart to this incredible panel of authors, educators, and just fantastic human beings, thank you. As I said, this is required listening for everybody. This is life. This is what we need to be engaged in. And we know that music gives us a powerful way to speak this language, if we only choose it. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart. Be well, be safe, and take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Music for All's mission is to create, provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through Music for All. Our vision is to be a catalyst to ensure that every child across America has access and opportunity to participate in active music making in their scholastic environment. I want to thank the Horizon Leans Forward team. Today was a call to action. Today was a statement of belief. Today was positioning us to move forward with strength and common purpose so that Alfred Watkins' grandchild does not have to have this conversation. The power of that, those words are going to be resonating with me long after today is over. I'd like to thank our national presenting sponsor, the Yamaha Corporation of America. Be sure to check out the Yamaha Educator Suite at yamahaeducatorsuite.com. And I would like to thank GIA Publications for their continued support. Before we say goodbye, it is important that you understand that now, more than ever, in these uncertain times, continue to impact Music for All, and we are extremely grateful for any donations gifted to our nonprofit organization. If you enjoyed this program, and in order for us to continue to provide our free educational resources and advocacy materials, please consider gifting to Music for All in any amount. Your gift allows us to serve our mission with future educational programming such as this event. Please visit musicforall.org/give. For Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Thank you.